I have attempted to recreate the smells of early Disneyland around its first 3 decades. You might not expect it, but a lot of Disneyland smelled quite a bit different to what we might expect it to smell like, and our modern noses might not have found all of it particularly pleasant. I developed recreations of the park scents based on research I've gathered, and I passed a load of formulae to my colleague Catherine at Aroma Prime, who prepared a load of samples for me to try. I went through 2 rounds of samples and 19 individual samples in total, so there was a lot to try, but I think I've got there with the 5 final scents that I have now. Scent number 1 is Main Street USA, and it took me 9 different blends to get this one right. I want to say it smells very nice. It does, but it's not nice in the traditional way that you'd sniff some perfume and say it's nice. It's not attractive, that's what it's not. It's realistic. Ultimately, this scent oil is sweet, inspired by the vanilla extract that the Candy Palace would put on a hot plate by their vents. So that was the beginning of what many people call smellitzers these days on Main Street, although they're technically not smellitzers, but I won't go into that. But also what I've done is I've included a cloud of tobacco smoke because I want to highlight the perhaps surprising and ironic presence of cigarette smoke in early Disneyland. People were allowed to smoke anywhere apart from in queues and in the rides. And this was the 1950s, so there was a lot of smoking. If anything, it helped enhance the authenticity of the early 1900s Main Street. And the end result is pretty nice. It's a little bit woody to reflect the wood of Main Street as well. I read an article that said when you stepped onto Main Street, you could smell the new wood, that new park smell. There was a staff handbook that read I think it was something like the hay burning Oatsmobile when talking about the horses. They were saying how you could see and hear and smell Main Street with reference to the horses. I did try experimenting with some horse smell in this. I also tried experimenting with a floral smell, a synthetic floral smell, because there was a source that said how at the flower market they would sell artificial flowers and they were synthetically scented. However, I was blending too much together. There was too much in this, but I'll show you a clip now that I recorded when I was trying the samples to give an insight into the kind of the thinking behind the process. I've just tested the first samples and there are some stinky ones like fish and tobacco, but ironically Main Street, which is meant to be absolutely delicious, is rancid. It is sickeningly sweet and I need to adjust it. I need to have a bit of vanilla from the Candy Palace, but also a bit of woodiness to bring out the tobacco smoke in that way, in a more palatable way that's also reflective of the materials in the buildings. And I'll tone down the flower market because this ain't the one. So you can see from that it was a bit of a challenge balancing the cacophony of smells that were present, and there is still a little bit of horsiness in it, a bit of hay, a bit of leather, that comes through in that kind of tobacco, woody, warm edge that it has. And I'm particularly pleased with that because I was recently an audience member in Zeitgeist's Spirit of the Time Zoomcast, and they had Bob Gurr on, and we could ask him questions, and I asked him what did Main Street smell like when it first opened. First-hand accounts are very handy when it comes to recreating smells. And Bob said that he remembered the horses, the sweat of the horses, the leather of the horses, and he said it gave the aura of a Main Street long ago. So to him the smell played a big role in creating that historical atmosphere. And I think this smell number 1, I think this recreation reflects that. Scent 5 is Pirates of the Caribbean. You might wonder how the ride smelt different in its early years to how it does today. Well, this recreation only captures a moment in time. I've tried to capture the earthy, humid scent of the water and the surroundings that so many people are familiar with. Imagineer Tom K. Morris has said that when the ride first opened, it smelt like a mouldy cavern, perhaps because of the damp cement in the basement. But I've also added a smoky element to this scent. And this element harks back to John Hench and Rolly Crump wanting to add a smoky element to the ride.
Well, we set the place on fire, and we have our audience trapped down in this flaming city.
but the local fire department and the management deciding that the smell of smoke in the building would panic people, and of course that would be an issue if it did spread further than the burning town. Now, there have been accounts of smoky smells being used over the years, possibly in the 70s. Thanks to a source shared by Todd James Pierce, we do know that Yale Gracie experimented with a smoky smell around the bridge at the opening to the burning town using an atomizer. I believe the scent spread too far, which was of course the concern, but it's interesting to know that all that time ago there was experimentation with a themed smell in Pirates of the Caribbean, and that there was an intention from the start to have a smoky smell. And I am pleased that at Walt Disney World they do have a smoky smell now. But this scent recreation, essentially it captures this story of that ambition and that intention and Yale Gracie's experimentation. It's that moment in time captured in here. I am really happy with how this turned out, because when you smell it, it depends what you focus on. If you focus on the water, that pirate's water, you can smell it there. I can imagine being there, but also the gunpowder comes through as well. So it's not the Pirates of the Caribbean that most people think about when they think of its smell. They normally go straight to the water smell, but it's a moment in time. Scent 4 is the smell of Tomorrowland. Now, I've heard it said that in early Tomorrowland the air was dizzying, and in fact the designer of the Autopia cars, Bob Gurr, has said that their fumes were god-awful, and he welcomed the fact that the cars would be updated to become electric. So this scent recreation is quite significant. Obviously it reflects the pollution in the air around Tomorrowland back in the day, but of course it also makes the sniffer think about how we treat the environment, how treatment of the environment has changed over time. As well as the Disneyland Railroad running on diesel, the submarine voyage at Tomorrowland also ran on diesel, and you can imagine people were in quite a tight space and there was quite a stink up until 2007 when the submarines became electric. Now, in his book Disney's Land, author Richard Snow remembers his uncle going to Disneyland with him and going on the submarine voyage with him in 1959, and his uncle had been on submarines during wartime, and he remembers his uncle saying, "Gee, it smells like the real thing." So there was this very noticeable atmosphere that the diesel would create. So my scent recreation mainly focuses on the diesel of the submarine voyage, but also the oiliness of the vehicles back then. And like I say, it's partly to recreate that atmosphere and tell that story, but that story specifically is about the treatment of the environment and how vehicles have developed over time, and with that the smellscape changes. And when you sniff this and smell the oiliness and compare it to Tomorrowland today, the smell tells that story. The smell reminds us of how times have changed, and that's part of the power of smell in terms of storytelling. It can highlight significant changes in culture and attitudes and history. The next scent is the fine tobacco shop. Now, smoking might be banned in Disneyland today, but when it first opened there was a tobacco shop that stayed open until 1990. They sold fragrant tobacco, wooden matches and wooden pipes as well, so I've incorporated those smells into this. It's kind of a warm, woody, spicy smell, a little bit like if you maybe had a grandparent who would smell of tobacco. It's a bit of a nostalgic smell. It's not so, not quite as punchy as the main street cigarette smoke. There are lots of sources that talk about the fine tobacco shop. One of them is the 1976 guide that talks about a vast selection of smoking materials and many unusual blends of tobacco. Something that's quite nice that kind of connects to this smell is that when I was asking Bob Gurr about his memories, I asked him what Walt Disney smelled like, and one of the things he said was cigarettes. And I like to think, perhaps, considering this is kind of inspired by the idea of the tobacco sold at Disneyland and kind of the smell of grandparents that smell of tobacco, maybe this is a little bit like what Walt Disney might have smelled like. Scent number 3 is Tom Sawyer Island, specifically fishing at Tom Sawyer Island. When Tom Sawyer Island opened, guests could go fishing. They could borrow rods and go fishing. My scent recreation is a little bit grassy, a little bit muddy, and very, very fishy. It's odoriferous, it's revolting, it reeks, it is a stench, it is a miasma. And that is because people would, after they went fishing, they would go and take their fish with them. They had the option of freezing it in a nearby restaurant, but instead some of them would take their fish into the park and leave them to rot under the hot sun. And of course that would create a scent, and the fishing activity did not last very long. So once again, not every smell that's going to be created is going to be nice, and the ones that tell the best stories, in my opinion, are often the worst ones. They're the ones that stay in your memories the most. So that's why I made this one, and I made it also because it was such a fleeting odour. That odour existed during the course of the problem that occurred, and then it was gone forever as soon as the fishing stopped. You will probably never smell rotting fish in Disneyland ever again, let's hope. So that's why I wanted to capture this little piece of history in an olfactory form. You might wonder why I've bothered recreating these 5 scents that evoke what Disneyland might have smelt like. What's really important is that these smells would have had such an impact on people's memories at the time about their emotions. When you sniff something, it triggers your limbic system in your head. You're taken back to certain emotions and memories. Disneyland was very impactful on people's memories. And the fact that these smells that would have had such an effect on people, some of them are completely extinct. The Sawyer Island fishing stuff, very few people in the world will have experienced that scent. And what's more, smells can tell us stories, just like how museums use smells to draw people's attention to stories. If you sniff that Sawyer Island smell, you'll be like, what is that stink? Disneyland didn't smell like that, did it? And it opens up a whole book of tales that can be told. Now, of course, these scents are in liquid form. They're oils. I can't spread them around the world. I'm not planning on selling them. This is for educational purposes. And there's a big movement, particularly in academia, around olfactory heritage and preserving smells so that they're not lost to time. So the people that went to Disneyland when it first opened, or over the first 3 decades, they would have smelt so many things that just aren't there anymore, and that might be completely forgotten about if we don't talk about them and make records of them. So what this collection is essentially is a record, so that it is in some kind of archive exists, some kind of way of experiencing an interpretation of what Disneyland smelt like back in the day, because the way things smell is really important. When the E.T. ride at Universal changed their pine smell in the queue, people went wild because there are generations of people that have really personal memories connected to that smell. So I've mainly done this to start a conversation, to get people talking and thinking about the smells around them when they visit a theme park. I want them to think about preserving the memories that we have of these smells, discussing them and treasuring what we have and what it means to us, the value of these smells around us, and the smells that have passed as well.